Traditional food storage without electricity in the early 1900s was a system, not just a trick. Before electric refrigeration became common, folks didn't rely on just one method to preserve their food. They used layered systems that all worked together across the different seasons. Back in the early 1900s, especially in rural North America and Europe, food storage was really treated as infrastructure. Homes were built around it, routines were built around it, and honestly, failure meant hunger. What we're about to talk about isn't just folklore or some kind of nostalgia. These were proven systems that kept families fed all year long, using physics, biology, and some pretty disciplined timing. Root cellars, well, they formed the backbone of year-round cold storage. Well, the root cellar was really the primary cold storage unit back in the early 1900s. Built down below the frost line, often tucked into a hillside or right underneath the house, it kept a steady temperature between about 35 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year long. The secret wasn't just cold air, but, using thermal mass and good insulation. Thick stone or packed earth walls, they slowed down temperature changes a whole lot, while the earth above worked as a natural insulator. Folks would store vegetables unwashed, packed away in crates or barrels, and sometimes layered with sand, sawdust, or straw to help control the moisture. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, and cabbages. Well, those could last 6 months or even longer if you stored them right. Apples, though, you always kept those separate since they give off ethylene gas, which can make the other produce spoil faster. Ventilation was controlled through adjustable vents to prevent mold while avoiding freezing. This system can still be applied today by using a buried container, a basement corner insulated with soil, or even a lined pit in colder climates. The principle remains temperature stability, darkness, and controlled airflow. Iceboxes extended preservation into warmer months using harvested winter ice. Iceboxes were not refrigerators. They were insulated cabinets lined with tin or zinc, cooled by large blocks of natural ice harvested in winter from ponds and lakes. Ice was stored in ice houses packed in sawdust, which slowed melting enough to last into late summer. Meltwater drained away to prevent contamination. Food placement mattered. Dairy and meat were stored closest to the ice, while vegetables occupied lower compartments. Regular cleaning was mandatory because, well, there was no mechanical circulation to hide neglect. This method allowed fresh milk butter and cooked leftovers to last days instead of hours. A modern equivalent can be recreated with high-quality coolers block ice and drainage management. The historical lesson is not the box itself, but disciplined rotation and cleanliness. Smoking transformed meat into long-term protein without refrigeration. Smoking was both preservation and pest control. Early 1900s smokehouses were small, separate structures designed to keep temperatures low enough to dry meat without cooking it. Hardwood smoke, particularly hickory, oak, and apple, deposited antimicrobial compounds onto the meat's surface, while dehydration reduced water activity. Meat was first cured with salt, sometimes sugar and nitrates, then hung for days or weeks depending on thickness. Proper airflow prevented rancidity. Smoked hams, bacon, and sausages could last months when stored in cool, dry conditions. This method is still viable today using simple smoke chambers or cold smoke attachments. The essential principle is slow dehydration combined with smoke chemistry, not heat. Salt curing, allowed meat and fish to survive entire seasons. Salt was the most critical preservative of the era. Meat was packed in crocks or barrels layered with coarse salt, drawing moisture out and creating an environment hostile to bacteria. Fish, especially cod and herring, were heavily salted and sometimes dried afterward. Salt pork and salt beef were staples because they could survive transport, storage, and temperature fluctuation. Before use, meat was soaked to remove excess salt. The trade-off was flavor intensity, but the reward was reliability. Today, this knowledge applies directly to off-grid storage and emergency preparedness using food-grade salt in sealed containers. Fermentation preserved vegetables while actually increasing their nutritional value. Fermentation was not a trend. It was just, routine. Cabbage became sauerkraut, cucumbers became pickles, and beans were sometimes fermented before drying. Natural lactic acid bacteria converted sugars into acids, lowering pH and, preventing spoilage. Fermented foods were stored in stone crocks, kept cool and submerged to prevent oxygen exposure. This method preserved vitamins during those long winter months when fresh produce was unavailable. Modern application requires only salt, clean containers, and temperature awareness. The process remains unchanged. Drying removed moisture to stop decay entirely. Drying was used for fruits, herbs, beans, and sometimes meat. Apples, berries, and plums were sliced and dried in the sun, attic spaces, or low ovens. Once brittle, they were stored in cloth sacks or sealed tins away from moisture. Beans and grains were dried thoroughly before storage to prevent mold and insect infestation. Properly dried foods could last years. This method remains one of the most energy-independent preservation techniques available. Pantries were engineered spaces, not just cupboards, Early 1900s pantries were cool, shaded, and ventilated. Shelving allowed air circulation. Flour was stored in metal bins to keep rodents out. Eggs were preserved by coating them in mineral oil, or sometimes storing them in lime water, sealing the shell's pores. Nothing was stored casually. Every item had a lifespan and rotation schedule. Waste was treated as failure. These systems worked because they were combined, not isolated. Families did not rely on one method. Root cellars, curing, fermentation, drying, and ice storage worked together. When one failed, another compensated. This redundancy is the true lesson worth reviving. If you value serious historical knowledge that still works today, subscribe to Wisdom for the Journey. Share this with someone who understands that history is not entertainment alone, but instruction.